Hey everyone, and welcome back to the getwellbe podcast. This podcast is designed to arm you with the knowledge and awareness you need to get and stay well your whole life. Before we get started, I have one big important thing to tell you, which is that this is the last episode before my maternity leave. I'm extremely pregnant recording this right now, and I can't believe the time has finally come to meet this little man I've been cooking inside me for about 9 months. Because of my maternity leave, I won't be taking on new patient advocacy clients until at least spring of 2024. But remember that a great and more affordable way to access a lot of what I work on with my private clients is to take the Roadmap to Healing program, a program I co-created with the Heal documentary team about how to use your mind, spirit, and other tools like food to heal chronic health issues. You'll find that over at getwellbe.com in addition to my other programs. One is focused on non-toxic living and one for health professionals who wish to earn continuing education credits focused on holistic patient advocacy. And of course, you can read the written version of this episode with research links on getwellbe.com too. Okay, now let's jump in on stress, cortisol, and all the bad things that come with it. Cortisol is one of the hormones that gets talked about the most in day-to-day life, especially in the wellness corners of the internet and social media platforms. If you've come across these conversations, or even if you haven't, you'll likely know that high cortisol levels aren't good, but there's usually not more context given than that. How can you know if your cortisol levels are high or just average, and what can you do about it? You've probably heard cortisol being referred to as the stress hormone, which is a fairly accurate descriptor. But let's take it a step back to fully understand what that means. You can think of hormones as the messengers of your body. They're chemicals that coordinate all your bodily functions by communicating messages from one part of your body to another. Through chemical signals, they tell your body what to do, enabling you to adapt to your environment and respond to changing internal and external factors. Cortisol belongs to a class of hormones called steroid hormones, which are hormones created by certain glands, the adrenal glands and reproductive glands, that communicate with your central nervous system. Cortisol is produced by the adrenal glands, which are small glands located on the top of your kidneys, and its primary purpose is to regulate your body's stress response. When your body experiences any kind of stress, whether it's acute or chronic, your adrenals release cortisol. Cortisol is responsible for putting your body into a fight or flight state, flooding your bloodstream with glucose, and enhancing the brain's ability to use it. It also stops or slows down any non-essential bodily functions, like digestion, which some people would argue is pretty essential, but not when you have some kind of a big emergency that threatens your life, like running from a fire or a tiger. The cortisol is there to protect you from whatever you're up against, shifting you into a hyper-alert state where all your energy is focused on dealing with the stressor at hand. However, cortisol doesn't just regulate stress. It also plays an essential role in other bodily functions, like regulating your metabolism, inhibiting inflammation, modulating blood sugar, controlling your circadian rhythm, also known as your sleep-wake cycle. When everything is functioning properly, your body constantly monitors its cortisol levels and ensures they remain in check. But several things can throw off this delicate balance, impairing your body's ability to maintain homeostasis and sending your cortisol levels higher than they should be. And when this happens, a cascade of negative health effects tend to follow. But cortisol isn't bad. You want to have a certain amount of it in your bloodstream, but it shouldn't be too high, and it should fluctuate based on the time of day. Specifically, cortisol should peak in the early morning and decline throughout the day, which makes sense. The cortisol helps you wake up, and then it drops steadily so that you're sleepy when bedtime rolls around. But if your cortisol levels are too high, or if they're too high at the wrong time of day, you may start to experience some unpleasant symptoms of high cortisol levels, which include high blood pressure. Because cortisol puts your body in fight or flight mode, it raises your blood pressure. This is fine in moments of acute, short-term stress, but if you have chronically high cortisol levels, your blood sugar can also be chronically high. High blood sugar. High cortisol levels are associated with higher blood sugar levels. This makes sense given the stress response we described above. When you encounter stress, cortisol signals to your body that it should flood the bloodstream with sugar so that you have energy readily available to address the crisis at hand. When your cortisol levels are too high over the long term, this effect doesn't wear off, meaning your blood sugar levels remain elevated. Next, we have impaired digestion. As I mentioned before, when your body goes into fight or flight mode, it temporarily turns off non-essential functions like digestion. So that means that poor digestion is one of the hallmark symptoms of high cortisol levels. And research shows that chronically elevated cortisol leads to all sorts of digestive issues, from leaky gut to impaired absorption of micronutrients to abdominal pain and others. Next, we have extra abdominal fat. No one wants that. Cortisol impacts fat distribution, causing excess weight to be stored around the organs in your midsection. Multiple studies in both humans and animals show that chronically high levels of cortisol are associated with more abdominal fat. You can read more about the link between cortisol and belly fat in our guide to female hormonal imbalance on getwellbe.com. Next, we have trouble sleeping. Cortisol is meant to peak in the morning and drop off in the evening, as I mentioned before, letting you peacefully drift to sleep. But if your cortisol levels are high at nighttime, it can lead to insomnia, which is logical, considering that cortisol tells your body there's an immediate crisis to address. How can you sleep soundly if your body thinks there's a tiger hunting you? Next, we have headaches. Research has linked high cortisol levels with migraines as well as regular headaches. And then we have mental health issues. High cortisol levels are associated with some mental health problems like anxiety and depression. Again, this makes sense. When you're physiologically in panic mode all the time, it's going to have a psychological impact on you as well. And who wouldn't feel anxious when their body is primed to fight an enemy all the time? Next, we have irregular periods. Because cortisol is a hormone and all hormones exist in a precise balance with one another, high levels of cortisol can throw off your levels of other hormones. This imbalance, in turn, can lead to other hormone-related issues like irregular periods or missing or irregular ovulation. Last, we have skin problems. Research has tied elevated cortisol levels to skin issues like premature skin aging and acne. Though there's still research to be done on why exactly this happens, it may have to do with the effect cortisol has on your skin's oil glands. Note that not everyone with elevated cortisol will experience all or even any of these symptoms of high cortisol levels. But if they are high, it's likely you'll notice a few of these signs. To get a more definitive assessment of your levels, you can ask your doctor to measure your cortisol levels through a blood, urine, or saliva test. Just remember that normal cortisol ranges will vary from person to person. So even if your numbers are within what's considered the normal range, you may still have a problem. Consider your numbers holistically, looking at them in conjunction with any symptoms that you might be experiencing to determine if you need more testing or need to take steps to lower it. If you're experiencing any symptoms of high cortisol, your first question will and should be, why? As you may imagine, given the fact that cortisol is indeed the stress hormone, stress is a major contributor to high cortisol levels. But there are other causes of high cortisol that we'll discuss in a second. We'll be right back with those causes of high cortisol after this quick message. I don't know about you, but I never listen to the end of a podcast, so I'm hopping in here to let you know that the best way to stay empowered and on top of your health is to be in the WellBe community. So head to getwellbe.com/subscribe to make sure you're in like Flynn. On getwellbe.com, you'll learn about our online programs to help you go deeper and make life-altering changes to your health, and our awesome non-toxic product database. If you're more of a social media person, let's be friends on Instagram. You can find me at getwellbe. Okay, now back to the causes of high cortisol. First on our list is, you guessed it, stress. This is the biggie, so we'll address it first and foremost. Cortisol was meant for handling acute, short-term stress back in our ancestors' days. It sent your body into high alert so you could deal with predators, aka running from a tiger who's about to eat you, or other similar threats back in the day. But in today's modern world, where these sorts of threats are much more rare, but we all actually live much more stressful lives, people are living with chronically high cortisol levels. This is because your body can't tell the difference between the stress of a life-threatening situation versus the stress of a big work deadline or too many things on your to-do list. And so you pay the price in the form of high cortisol and all the symptoms that go along with it. Next, we have too much caffeine. Caffeine stimulates cortisol production. And so if your coffee habits have crept up a bit or are just completely out of control, it could be contributing to higher than normal cortisol levels. Right after caffeine is an unhealthy diet. Research has found that eating a diet high in added sugar, processed foods, and refined carbohydrates leads to significantly higher cortisol levels when compared to a more whole foods-based diet. Then we have certain medications. A few different medications may contribute to high cortisol levels, including oral contraceptives and, unsurprisingly, steroids, such as prednisone, cortisone, and hydrocortisone. Then we have elevated estrogen. So if your estrogen levels are high, it can cause your cortisol to increase. Elevated estrogen can be caused by a number of factors, including pregnancy or, again, hormonal contraception. It can also be caused by too many fake or xenoestrogens from toxic home cleaning and personal care products, pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides in food and water, including glyphosate, which is often found in conventionally grown non-organic food. And xenoestrogens can even be found in non-organic cotton tampons, unfiltered tap water, plastics, and canned foods. Then we have an underlying condition. So if your cortisol levels are high, it could also signal an underlying condition like hypo or hyperthyroidism, Cushing's disease, diabetes, PCOS, or pituitary gland malfunction. And last, we have an adrenal gland tumor. So both benign and cancerous tumors on the adrenal gland can secrete high levels of cortisol. This is relatively rare, but if you've ruled out all the other causes of high cortisol levels, it may be worth getting a scan. If you struggled with high cortisol, the most likely culprit is chronic stress. Before you take actions to lower your levels, it's important to consider all the causes of high cortisol in order to make sure you're not missing something. Now, what to do about it? Fortunately, there are concrete things you can do starting today to lower your cortisol levels naturally. Here are the most effective strategies. First, reduce your stress. This is different from changing how your body reacts to stress, which we'll talk about next. So look at your calendar and your to-do list and the past few weeks of your life. Did you run from one thing to another, constantly putting out fires and feeling stressed? Have you taken on too many responsibilities or stayed too long in a job or commitment you hate or find stressful? Have you put off delegating or getting help for something for a long time, but you know you should? Perhaps it's time to cut things that you find bring you a lot of stress and reorganize your calendar, your to-do list, and your life to have more time to move slowly, or at least not frenetically, and have time to be calm and quiet and reflective each day. Then, once you've cut, simplified, or changed everything you can from your life, consider that it could be your reaction to stress that's causing your cortisol levels to rise, not the sources of stress in your life. Which brings me to number 2. How your nervous system and your brain reacts to stress depends a lot on past experiences in your life, like childhood trauma, or how you were taught or witnessed parental figures reacting to stress. This doesn't mean feeling stressed by every little thing that comes up is a life sentence, even if that's what you saw your parents do or have been experiencing. There are things you can do to retrain your brain and calm your nervous system. One of those things that has some promising research is tapping. In one particularly striking study, subjects who used the tapping technique saw their cortisol levels drop by 43% compared to 2% in the control group. We have an interview on how tapping works and how to do it yourself with Jessica Ortner, and you can find that as a podcast episode by searching in your podcast app, getwellbe and Jessica Ortner, or you can find it on getwellbe.com. Other therapies and activities that help your nervous system manage inevitable life stress when it comes up are deep breathing, meditation, resetting your vagus nerve, mindfulness practices, and others. Then we have some supplements. Research has tied certain supplements to decrease cortisol levels. Some of the most promising supplements include fish oil, relora, and ashwagandha. You can find tons of curated, well-vetted, and approved supplements in our non-toxic product database. Next, we have getting regular exercise. It's commonly known that physical exercise is a good way to reduce stress. And this is for a number of reasons, including the fact that it causes your body to release endorphins, which is the happiness hormone, but also because it's shown to help reduce cortisol levels. Then we have spending time in nature. As Dr. David Perlmutter told us in our interview with him, spending time in nature reduces inflammation and cortisol. And you don't have to move to the woods or go on an all-day hike to reap the benefits. Research has found that spending as little as 20 minutes in nature can reduce stress. Get quality sleep. It's a vicious cycle. High cortisol levels disrupt your sleep, but poor sleep can also contribute to higher cortisol levels. It can be tough to break the cycle, but by focusing on sleep hygiene, regulating your circadian rhythm, and keeping a regular sleep schedule, you can take steps towards improving sleep quality and getting your cortisol levels back in check. Our guide to natural sleep aids, which you can listen to as a podcast episode or read on getwellbe.com, has some great tips on improving your sleep hygiene. Lastly, we have laughing. Not only is laughing fun and enjoyable, but it's also been shown to reduce cortisol levels. Most of the research on the topic has been done on laughing yoga, which is a form of yoga focused on, you guessed it, laughing, but it seems logical that the benefits would extend to laughter outside the yoga studio. As you can see, anyone wondering how to lower cortisol naturally has plenty of low effort, cheap, or free strategies to try. Even better, none of the tips that I just mentioned come with any side effects. And almost all of them are things that will improve your overall well-being in addition to helping you bring down your cortisol. So that's it for this episode and for this season before my maternity leave. To read the written version of this episode with research links, head to getwellbe.com or check out the link to the article in the show notes. And while you're there, definitely become a Wellbe Insider so you know when we're back to making all of our usual fabulous content and get it delivered to your inbox. If you haven't already and found this episode helpful or interesting, subscribe to the podcast. This way you'll never miss a new episode and they'll be delivered to you whenever we publish a new one. And please share this episode with family or friends who you think might find it valuable and informative. It means a lot and helps more people find our podcast. And if you love the Get Wellbe podcast, please leave a quick review wherever you listen to podcasts. It does a lot for helping us show up in search results. If you already have, then thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is your host, Adrienne Nolan-Smith, and thanks again for listening to the Get Wellbe podcast.